Welcome to bsdevelopers.io. Today, let us talk about one of the attributes of system design and architecture. When you are architecting a system, you will consider availability as one of the topmost criteria to architect and design a particular application. Be it website, be it a web server application, or be it a standalone application, availability is at most important these days. What do we mean by availability? So availability is making the system up and running for users request. So when a user, uh, when users request, then you should be able to respond, which means you should make your system up and running all the time. But is it something possible that to make a system up and running 24 by 7 without any interruptions? Theoretically, yes, it is possible. What happens is you cannot avoid some of the situations. You cannot avoid the faults that are being injected into the code, not deliberately, but as a unawareness or ignorance of the developer. So there are some conditions that go wrong. There are certain inputs that violate the principles, and then exception is not handled. So you would face some catastrophic errors, or you would face some functionality errors. Despite all these, how do you make an effort to make the system available? So that is today's topic. Let us dive in. So while your process is running, at the end of the day, you call it service, you call it application, you call it utility, it is a process. So you're running a process under the hood. That process is serving the requests. Now, so while that process is running, what makes it to check if the system is going to be faulty? Right? So to make it available, what is the first step that we have to do? You should know that the system is going to go down. Then you can correct it. You can take the repair steps. You can take the recovery steps. And so then after, you can also make one step ahead, and also you can predict that when the system may go down. So let us talk about how do we detect the possible faults. It's been there in the industry. These strategies, these tactics have been there in the industry. We will talk about them in brief. How do you know that the system is going to be faulty? For example, so you check with the person's heartbeat. Now, when you check person's heartbeat, the doctor would know if his heart is functioning properly or not, if he's healthy or not. If it is beating more than the standard, then it's an alarm that there is something wrong. If it is beating less than the standard, then also it's an alarm that there's something is going to be wrong. So based on that, the doctor prescribes appropriate medicines or tests for the diagnosis. Likewise, we also have in the software a checking for the heartbeat of the service. So you're running the process, and your another heartbeat service is standing outside, and then periodically checks the heartbeat of the process. So in order to detect a fault, right? So one of the mechanisms that you use is heartbeat. This heartbeat mechanism periodically goes, checks the health of the system, and comes back. So here, in the case of human heart, right, you are checking the heartbeat and then taking the measure, taking the count. Then you are deciding that yes, it is a healthy heart or unhealthy heart. So similarly, this heartbeat implementation, what you do, this heartbeat function goes to the service and checks for a particular statistic. If it is fine, then you come back and say that the system is fine. If you notice something abnormal, then you would report the same. So what do you do when you report the same is a corrective action. So we are only talking about detection of a fault, whether the fault is going to happen or not. So heartbeat is one of the mechanisms which you would implement to check the health of the service. And another one is a ping, right? So this you might have heard it many times because we have a ping protocol to check the network. So you type ping and IP address, so the ping protocol goes and checks, pings the IP address that you have entered and comes back. So when it comes back, that means it is reachable. The IP address is reachable, otherwise not. So similar to that, you also have a ping tactic or strategy to implement to check the health of the service. So in ping, what happens? You go ahead and hit the particular service IP address and port number, then you would get the response back. So which means that your IP address, your server's IP address and port is active and it's able to respond. So which will give you the information about, say, about the health of your particular service. Is that information deep enough? That's for another discussion. And ping will also give you the outer health of the system. So ping is also one method to implement it. And then you talk about echo. Echo is another mechanism. So in echo, you don't go and check the health of the service, but the server itself will echo the status. Periodically, the server is implemented to echo its health. So you would read that health to determine that system is healthy or faulty. Well, so heartbeat, ping, echo are some of the methods that you would use. What else do you use? So these days, because everything is online, like cloud services, you are making use of it. So for everything, you are sending an HTTP request. So monitoring is another aspect that will determine the health of the system. Monitoring. So you would implement monitoring to check if the system, working properly or not. So when you monitor, you do monitor for particular characteristics of the system. Let's say if your system is taking user input from the web, so you would check whether how many requests did it serve in the last 1 minute. How many requests can it typically serve? Let's say, yeah, it typically can serve 1,000 requests in a minute, and you are monitoring that. You start to notice that the number of requests the server is serving is coming down. Either it could be because the number of requests are less, or it could be the server is congested so that it is not able to respond. So therefore, you would monitor now the number of input requests and the number of responses. So you monitor these two characteristics to determine the health of the system. This is for an example. So likewise, you have tens of characteristics to monitor to determine the health of the system. And that monitoring system will also let you know if the system is going to be faulty or if the system is being utilized, like underutilized or overutilized. So monitoring is a subject on its own. There are many solutions in open source and as well as proprietary. Monitoring is another aspect which will help you after implementation to achieve availability. And the system itself is been implemented. So your server itself is implemented with exception handling. So if something goes wrong, you developed and designed a system such that the system replies saying that there is an exception happened. So as implementer, your job is to read that exception and take a corrective action. That corrective action we'll talk later. For now, the system is implemented with exception handling, so you would know that there is an exception. You need to be careful about the next request, or you need to be careful about how to correct it or repair it. So exception handling is another way to do it. And there is another method called voting. In voting, what happens is in ping or heartbeat, there is only one service that is standing outside of your system and then sending a request to get the response. In voting, what happens? You don't rely on one service going and fetching the data about health of your service. In voting mechanism, you will deploy multiple agents, and these multiple agents would go check the health of the system and gets back the response. Now, as a voting strategy, what you do, you collect all the information. If the information collected is synonymous across all the voting agents, you would consider it as a healthy system. If you start to notice disparate values from these three voting agents, then you would devise a strategy to repair and recover from that failure that is going to happen. So voting has its own strategies, like what do you do after you receive the voting information from those agents? You can deploy different strategies based on your requirement to bring the system to maximum availability. So these are some of the availability strategies or tactics that you would want to implement to detect a fault in the system. I hope this gave you a brief introduction about how you achieve availability in software system design and architecture.